book. I don't know why it was behaving oddly. So here's hoping. All right. I don't know. I've not been doing too well. Actually, that's not true. I was doing okay for the first part of the last week. Starting to get my head back straight. Starting to work some things out, get some things figured out. I've had a few things, and honestly, nothing's really completely derailed that. It just feels like this is a deeper pit than I first realized that I have to crawl out of. My big problem right now is some pain issues. I'm in a fair bit of pain. Not that I'm not used to a certain amount of pain. I'm a little anxious about it, I will say that. Part of me wonders, I do wonder if I could bring back my well-being category of content. I'm not totally sold on the idea of going back to the way I was doing things before. I don't think that's where I want to end up going. So I'm doing a little, and I can probably do some thinking about it here tonight too. We can probably think about that a little bit here on the channel. Figure out what it is I want to do. Because I do think it would be valuable to figure out what I want to get out of this channel and what I want to contribute with this channel. Because, like, as it stands right now, I'm mostly just journaling live, I guess. Yeah, so I mean, and if I'm gonna do that, I should lean into that a little bit and just do that, not this half-assed version of it that I tend to do sometimes. So I gotta figure out. There's the mic right here. Sorry, I gotta figure out some things here. I gotta figure out if it makes sense to do the work through the effort to get my head back on straight live. I don't know if I have to do it live. I think I will probably, if I'm gonna do this smartly, which I should do, I might do something along the lines of Tuesday night live interaction, and I might set up something similar to this as pre-recorded for other nights. And that can be a little bit more of my, no, see, like I kind of feel like to a certain degree there's a benefit to doing the work through some of my health and well-being stuff live. I do like the idea of Tuesdays just being creative space and journaling kind of stuff. But I think like a Thursday or a Sunday sort of mental health work and maybe physical health work, depending on how my situation is going to square out in the next few weeks. A week from today, so probably the next time I do one of these videos, a week from today, I should have finished up with a cardiovascular health check, which I can't tell if that has me anxious enough to start seeing things that aren't necessarily there, because I'm not a stranger to physical pain. Like, my body hits me periodically with random pains. But I've had very recently a round of issues that freak me the hell out. And I don't know if that's my mental health coupling with my physical health to freak me out, or if it's something I should really be considering getting work done for. So the last few days, I want to say 3 days almost, I have had absolutely horrible pain in my leg, my right thigh to be specific. Now, it started on the exterior side of the right leg. It has now migrated to the inside of the thigh, which is where your artery runs, which freaks me out because I really, really am anxious about the possibility of like a clot or something like that forming. And if that's something that's going on, I'm a little worried about it. But it doesn't seem to have any of the hallmarks that would indicate that. It's just a burning, searing pain. And so it's likely a pinched nerve. It's a long pinched nerve is what it is. It's my whole frickin' front right thigh. And it hurts a lot. It hurts pretty bad. It's not so bad that I can't walk, but it's pretty bad. And so there's a part of me that's worried about that. And I'm having like pain in other places, which is not unusual. The thigh one is a new one for me. That one sort of hit out of nowhere. And what that tends to do to my mental health is really, really set that off. So my anxiety kicks in. And some of that is stuff I have to work through. But I think the other thing that happens with some of my mental health is depression can kick in when enough things go wrong, that a sense of having always been in a wrong situation comes up. It's one of the things, like I've said to a few people recently, is I've been struggling with things going wrong so long and all at once that it's easy to forget that it's not always like this and that it won't always be like this. And so in my mind, we get to this mindset of my life is suffering. It always has been suffering. It always will be suffering. And that is a very depressed mindset. It's not one I have had for a while. It's been a few good years since I had that kind of thing happen to me. But it can really, really derail you. And it saps your energy. It makes it harder for you to do the things that make your life worth living, which is exactly what you need to do in those types of situations. Like, if you're in a situation where you think your life is and has been and always will be suffering, it's one of those, like, that seems like an obviously exaggerated mentality. Like, if you really sit and think about it, your life can't have always been miserable all the damn time. There was a point. You know what it means to laugh because you have laughed. Not a fake laugh, not putting on a laugh for friends and family. Somewhere in your life, you have laughed in such a way that can only be ascribed to a feeling of happiness or joy or amusement. So, in that moment, it's not impossible that you could be miserable and laughing with joy at the same time, but it's really suspect that you were miserable even then. So we know on the face of it, there is a lie in that kind of concept of I always have been miserable, because you can't have always been miserable. And by extrapolating further, we can also gain the sense that if it hasn't always been miserable, it won't always be miserable after this moment either. And one of the easiest things we can do is to fill moments with laughter or joy or interests or passions or excitement. And so the desire or the one of the best things you can do in that mental space of being miserable, unhappy, and struggling is find a way to live a moment that isn't struggling or misery. But it's super hard to get yourself into a position to do that kind of thing when you're exhausted from the being depressed or stressed or anxious and struggling with all the problems that you're trying to deal with and trying to get yourself into a place where they're not problems or they're at least to a dull roar. So I do think that, part of that mental health struggle is ongoing. But I also like reflecting on it, even as I sit here and speak about it. Like this year has been a hard year on me. It has taken a lot of things from me, and it's done a lot of things to me. But if I were really honestly sitting and thinking about it, when those things happened and the problems hit me, my reaction to those problems at the time that they happened, in many cases, was not like, oh, more of the same. It was like, oh no, how could this happen? Why is this happening right now? Because before those moments hit, things were not bad. They were pretty good. There were good things going on. So, like, there's the hint, there's the clue that that feeling of things being bad is a lie. Things having been bad that whole time. They weren't. Now, I mean, it's understandable for some of the reasons that my brain delivers those ideas to me. It's understandable where they come from. Because your brain is immediately seeing and reacting to the current problems you're dealing with. And delving back to find similar problems in the past to match it to. At least that's what my brain is doing. So the housing insecurity issue that I'm sort of semi-ongoing with, that's a reflection of 4 years ago when, 4.5 years ago when the landlord that on the property that I lived on had passed away, and somebody new bought the property. And about 4 years ago, this month, I believe it was this month, 4 years ago, that I had just gone into court to fight the new owner about an eviction for all of us who lived on the property, who had never deserved an eviction and had been promised we'd be able to stay on the property. So I had to go into the court to fight that fight. And that's a whole long different story to deal with. And it's not necessarily to go into all of that detail. The reason I bring it up is 3 years ago, yeah, 3 years ago was the court case. No, 4 years ago was the court case. 3 years ago, I was traveling across country. I would have been getting back from my cross-country trip 3 years ago. So 4 years ago was the court case in which I didn't lose, but I still didn't get to keep the home that I had had for 8 years. So that housing insecurity was there too. And 8 years prior to that was the point in which things fell apart at the previous place that I had lived, when it was revealed that the person that I had been paying my rent to for my share of the living situation wasn't passing our rent on to the landlord who he had the lease with. He was pocketing our rent. And that fell apart pretty hard. And it took a little while, but we ended up moving in and finding the new place that I ended up staying at for 8 years. But that first 6 months was not a good 6 months. So again, there was an insecurity of housing for a while. And half a year prior to that, I lived in a place for a couple years where there were certain problems. And again, I lived there for a couple years, and prior to that, I lived at another place for a couple years. And each time we go through that, there is a point where we will hit a year where I moved 5 times in 2 years. And so there is that sense that my mind can give me of saying like, oh, I recognize these problems because I've always had these problems. And I haven't always had them. Like, I had 8 years of a pretty good situation going on. And so, like, it's not always been this way. It won't always be this way. And to a certain degree, it begs the question, is it currently that way, or is that just what my brain is thinking it is? Because here's the thing that I really think my brain may be doing, may be playing a trick on me here. Is it as I'm perceiving it? Or is my mind using its anxieties, fears, and depressions to paint it to look like it's gone bad? And that's not just the housing situation or the job or the car or my health. It's all of those things. The question really remains in my head of how much of this is really bad and how much of this is my own mental health making it look that way. It's not quite this placebo. It's almost a nocebo scenario. So if you're familiar with the nocebo scenario, a placebo is when two people are given something for a common concern. So if you stand up and you get dizzy, if two people stand up and they get dizzy regularly, predictably, reproducibly, and we give them each a different pill, one of them gets a pill that's actually supposed to address the problem, and the other one gets a sugar pill. If sorry, a little bit of a humorous thought occurred there. I'll share it with you actually here. So maybe placebos aren't what we're learning about there. Maybe we're discovering the best medicine in the entire world is a sugar pill. Anyway, moving past that, what you end up having is you usually do this on a larger sample base. You'll have hundreds of people on one group and hundreds in another, and nobody knows which group they're in. And generally speaking, what you want to have happen is the one you give the medication to have a demonstrable beneficial effect of the medication being supplied. But weirdly, it's almost a given that people in the second group who got a placebo, the sugar pill, some of them will also improve. And so that's a placebo effect. The nocebo is essentially the counter to this, where you can have a group of people with a condition that could be improved with medications. You supply them with the medications. And again, this is the same scenario as the placebo. So you have 100 people and 100 people. 100 people who have dizziness upon standing, post-orthostatic tachycardia syndrome or something like that. POTS. Anyway, they stand, they get dizzy, predictably and repetitively. You give one group sugar pills and one group medications. The group you give the sugar pill, you may have somebody who thinks they have the medication start to demonstrate an improvement in their condition. By the same token, somebody who's actually getting the medication might be convinced enough that they are getting a sugar pill. And in being convinced that they're getting something that shouldn't make a beneficial effect on them, they will not get better. And that is the nocebo, where your brain convinces you what you're doing isn't going to make it better, so you don't get better. It actually combats or doesn't benefit from the thing that should work on it. And I think to a certain degree that there's a nocebo effect going on sometimes in some of my thought processes, where instead of being able to see things clearly without a bias, without something being introduced to contaminate the results, my conviction that things are getting worse and that things that I'm trying to do aren't helping is making it so it doesn't help, and it does look like it's getting worse. But that's because that's what I'm looking for. In the same way that somebody with a nocebo expects not to have results because they think they're taking something that shouldn't have results. They're expecting that it won't help. Or they're expecting that it won't stop it from getting worse. In the same way, my brain may very well be seeing all the solutions or all the options around me is not working. And in fact, nothing's stopping things from getting worse. And so it's constructing problems and not allowing me to resolve them in that regard. So I do wonder if there's some of that going on. Because here's the thing. I would guarantee you at the time I was going through the court case for the eviction process, my mind was not in a good place. It was stressed, lost, confused. And there was even a moment where, in the desperate scramble to save my belongings, and I lost a lot of them, um, I got a storage unit and I packed as much as I could into the car, drove it to and from that storage unit. I spent over a week trying to get 8 years of my life, more than 8 years, because I had stuff that I had from my childhood with me when I moved in. I had to get all that out of there and into storage, and I scrambled and I struggled and I scrambled and I struggled. And I failed to remember to renew my driver's license on time. So, bam, I got hit with a fine and another problem on top of something else. And it seems like just one more problem stacked on the heap that just drives you further into the ground. I don't really remember it like that, though. I barely remember that being a factor in my head. Like the struggle of getting out of there on time and the feeling of betrayal and things going on at that time was not a good place to be. But it feels so distant and transitory because it didn't persist indefinitely. You know, I lived out of my car for a couple months after that through the summer. And I was miserable because it was a rainy, wet, gross summer. Very similar to what we've had here this year. And that time, it was so miserable. And I remember around the same time, one of the other things that happened was the car that I had, the sports utility vehicle, had additional problems. I had just had it for about 6-8 months at that point. An 8-month-old vehicle purchased from a dealership, and I had to put $2,000 into fixing it, and I didn't have $2,000 because I had put several grand into making sure that it wouldn't cost me a lot per month to pay off. And so it really felt like a slap in the face that I couldn't get the car to pass inspection in time for my birthday without getting multiple $1,000s worth of repairs. At the same time that I had to struggle with the idea that I had failed to remember to renew my driver's license in time, got a ticket, and had to go get that resolved while I was trying to get all of my belongings out of a place that I had lived for 8 years, while dealing with the fact that I had to go to court to fight some of the things that they were doing that were shady as all hell. That was a miserable time. But in my head, as I think back on it, it was harsh and brutal for me, but I adapted and subsequent to a little bit of that time, things I learned in that process, I applied to traveling across the country. I got a gig that gave me enough money to save up that it allowed me to travel across country half the time living out of my car. And I had adventures on that trip that admittedly was anxiety provoking and difficult to achieve, but that was a decent trip. It was one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. Now, towards the end of that, I burnt out, yes. But I feel like that's the thing that, instead of the current situations reminding me of the hard times of that, I need to figure out how to tap into that sense of, remember when, yes, this other time was similar, but remember that toughness of that time wasn't a permanent situation. You weren't stuck in that phase. Now, admittedly, there is a tendency for my over analytical brain to look back on that time and say, maybe we didn't ever fix those problems. Those things that were ongoing at the time, maybe we didn't fix them. Maybe we just put them off, and they're what's reemerging now. And maybe that's something to look into. Maybe that's something to think about in the future. But as it stands right now, they serve as a reminder, those memories of past struggles serve as a reminder that A, they didn't last as struggles, and B, by changing my frame of reference, by changing how I looked at the situations, I found them as opportunities to learn things that enabled me to have greater experiences. And to me, being able to cultivate that kind of mindset then suggests to me that there may be a way to do that now. And I have shut that part off because I'm expecting it to be hard. That sort of nocebo effect of, this can't get better by applying similar thought processes now because this is a mess and this is not the same as last time. It's a different level of problems. No, literally at that time, you lost your car broke down. You almost couldn't get it renewed to be able to use it anymore. Your living situation was difficult. Your job was almost non-existent at that point. And your health was probably struggling from some of those things. And your sleep was probably disrupted in the same way that mine's been disrupted off and on in the last few months. I mean, there are a lot of parallels. And most of those you found ways to resolve that didn't destroy you. And in fact, most of those helped you find new things to explore and be excited about. I think that's what I need to cultivate and work on some. But I will probably, by next time, which will be a week from today, be talking a little bit more about the physical health stuff, because that's where we're going to probably be in next time. I am due to go in to see a cardiologist for a stress test to see what kind of damage has been done to my cardiopulmonary system, I guess. And in the meantime, we will see if the leg pain consistently plagues me, if I will have to go in for a separate visit with my doctor. So is it a blood clot? I seriously doubt it. Like, there's not any indicators that would set that off. But who knows? It'll be what it'll be, I guess. I'll have to figure that out as we go. But we should have some answers or thoughts on it by a week from today. And then I'm still working out a few of the things to deal with the replacement for my car, and it's not ideal because it's burning a lot of oil, and it may cost me a couple hundred at least, if not close to $1,000 to get it up to pass inspection. And then I'll try to squeeze a year out of it, at least. Actually, that's something I should probably think about here. What would I have to do to make it pay itself off? Times. No, you're doing temperature calculation. That's not what I'm asking you for. 131 times. All right, so that gives me a sense of the cap of what I could put into it for repairs before it returns the investment. And if I can keep the repairs down low, if I can keep the repairs super low to pass inspection, I don't even have to make it through a year for the amount I save from using it to pay for the repairs to keep it up to use it. And it gives me enough time that the trade-in value won't have been substantially changed by continuing to use it and potentially trade it in for an upgrade. So that would be that's a viable option. It's not super bad. So that's one thing I can think about doing, is think about the car in that regard. Think about the living situation. I got to work through that a little bit. And then the job, I am in the process of finding something better. There is a part of me, and this is not a recommended approach to mental health, is in the living situation in particular, the thought process of, like, in our area, living spaces are exorbitantly expensive. The housing market is not great. But if I can keep what I have going, I can outweigh that situation. The idea that prospects for my living situation improve as time goes by I think that's like a hope I can have for a while at least. And if I can keep this working for what it needs to do, the prospect that it gives me time to get in place other opportunities that I can't line up fast enough now. I don't know if that makes any sense. It's sort of along the lines of the idea that instead of thinking about things like the Opportunity Forge channel that I created, instead of just setting an arbitrary launch date like I did, the idea that if we just start getting the things we need in place, there may come a time where I could get studio space to launch bigger and better for that kind of thing. That's the sort of mindset I'm talking about. That's not what I'm talking about actually doing right now. I'm just saying along the lines of jobs, cars, living situations, those types of things. The idea that what I currently have available to me offers me time. for the rest of the factors involved in each of those to change, and for me to work on actively changing them in a direction that's beneficial towards me. So I think that's probably the best I can hope for right now with regard to the living situation. But the car, I do think there's ways to make that make more sense over time. My temptation with the car is to get it to pass inspection and just imagine it as something that will always be good for the next 5 years. And that's not the case. I can't treat it like that, because I know this is a car with over 100,000 miles on it. Just barely over 100,000 miles, about 100,000 miles. It's a make that as they get older like this, they eat a lot of oil. And so if you're not watching it, it can eat enough that it can do further damage to itself without you knowing. That's sort of like, that's the problem with it right now. And after everything I've been through over the last 3 or 4 months, that feels like a catastrophe. Like, my backup option for a vehicle is one that's determined to destroy itself if I don't stop it from doing it by checking it regularly and doing extra things to take care of it. But in the long sense of the thing, it's just another quirk of this particular vehicle. Now, there may be some things I can do to tweak it to prevent that from being an issue anymore, like swap out the PCV valve. PCV, and that's almost like saying pin number. It's the PCV. It's a petroleum control valve, condenser valve. I don't know. It's basically it's a valve that takes the vaporized oil that would otherwise be combusted in the engine out of it. But if the valve, there's a little spring in that valve that, as it gets older, the spring just doesn't work anymore. And so instead of recondensing that oil out and recycling it back to the engine, it just burns it in the engine. Theoretically, that's a $20 some odd part and a 15 to 20 minute repair that may change some of those factors really quickly. So I may have to look into that and see if I can learn to do it myself. But outside of that, like $5 a month of additional oil added to it to prevent it from doing itself any harm, that's a quirk of a vehicle. That's not a death sentence to a vehicle. So I'm trying to keep that in mind. And the job situation will be what it'll be. I've got some applications in on something, and the prospect is that I could potentially end up with a better job, one that's less miserable for me, and pays better, and uses less of my time, so I can use more of my time for my own projects. And if I can get some of my own projects far enough into the system of getting done, I might be able to build a series of things that I'm doing that'll pay me enough that I don't have to work a part-time job for somebody else. I can do part-time income for myself as my income makers. And if that's something I can get to a point where I can do that, then it becomes a question of, can I stack them? Can I do a part-time job and my projects that count as a part-time job to equal more than most people would make at a full-time job and allow me enough income to afford to live in this area again? And can I do that in such a time frame that I can work it around the current living situation that I have now? That's sort of what's on my mind right now for how to go with that. We're approaching 45 minutes. I'm going to call it here. I will see you in a week. I think we'll probably do some. I mean, I guess for now we're probably going to be talking about health and well-being stuff because that's the big stuff on my plate right now. And I do think I don't mind doing a little more of that kind of thing regularly. I do want to do some more of the brainstorming and creative play here. But I may opt to shift a lot of that over to pre-recorded because I don't know that the long rambles is the right format for some of that. I'm still thinking about some of that. I do think doing the 1-minute reviews and creative prompts are things that I may end up doing some more of. So 1-minute reviews, creative prompts, health and well-being discussion, and then probably just a brainstorming fun regular live stream. I think that's a workable thing to work towards in the future. I think I said before, for the month of July, I think I'm going to focus on just doing Tuesday nights for right now until I get things figured out a little bit better. So I want to thank you for joining me tonight. I will see you in a week. Take care and have a good night.